and welcome to the Bacon Butty University. Today, class, we are going to learn the word talisman. It is not a tally man keeping record of how many times I say unlucky, but a talisman in football is a specific player that makes the team do bits. A major piece in the puzzle to make the team play how they do, and without them, the team is in the bin. So welcome to the FPL Talisman Draft. The players I'm looking for here are the ones that are always involved in their team's attack. The true sharks in their team, snapping up any involvement they can be in, being the main source of golassos. Without them, their team just turns into absolute wet wipes, absolute wonky donkeys doing nothing without them. So I thought I'd have a whirlpool, have a spin at attempting a draft completely made up of talisman, where I'm not really suggesting the team itself, but more of just an understanding of how talisman can be great success in FPL, and making points on why these kind of players are the kind of players we should go for. But hold my burrito as we start the draft with the Mr. Mexican man, Raul Jimenez. He started in all but one league games for Wolves last season, where he only made that one sub-appearance after a busy bee schedule of Europa League in midweek, which they don't have this year, so even better, yeah? But he managed to be directly involved in 45% of Wolves league goals last season, meaning almost every other Wolves goal he scored or assisted it. I mean, it does help that he takes penalties as well, but still, lovely stuff. He's just very good and a clinical finisher that just takes his chances. Someone you can always rely on, consistent, caring, loving, and just a good chap. Or maybe it's that Wolves rely on him too much, and without him, they can't score. Now, in terms of FPL returns, what one that is doesn't actually matter too much, as you can have the whole squad anyway, so having Jimenez will just Amazon Prime you the points anyway it goes. But what it can be used to look at is that if you want some of that Wolves attack, especially for longer runs of fixtures, Raul is your best option and not being a bad option at all. Moving on to the Serbian Undertaker, the choke-slamming bear, Aleksandar Mitrovic. Now Mitrovic, the absolute beast himself, managed to play every single minute for Fulham in the league last season, in games that he started, which was just 40 games, not bad, But last season, even in the Championship where his teammates around him might actually be able to score, which they probably won't be able to in the Premier League, Mitrovic was directly involved in 43% of Fulham's goals. Now I do want to mention I'm pretty much only going off the last season's involvements, but I've tried to pick players that have at least done it consistently for their teams for longer than a year. So not only was Mitrovic the top scorer in the Championship last season, but he's proven he can score in the Premier League before, where if Fulham are to do anything at all, especially in their nice fixture run at the start of the season, then I think just got a slight feeling that Mitrovic could be involved in that. And that is one of the main things we are looking at here with talisman. If a team has a great run of fixtures, but just like Fulham, there's not a lot of players we can choose from an FPL perspective, their talisman should be the go-to player, Mitrovic being Mr. Fulham. With our final go-to talisman forward being the party man himself, Jamie Vardy, still polishing his shoes after he got the golden boot last season, but last season he was directly involved in over 40% of Leicester's goals. Now they did go through some rough patches, where usually that was because the Vardy party wasn't quite happening, but as we saw at the start of the season, he definitely can put his shooting boots on even in tougher games. Now what makes Vardy a quite different talisman is, with most of these teams we are looking at, they are either a high up team with a lot of different players and options, or they are a lower team with a standout performer, where Vardy is kind of somehow both. Because even after the first full year of Brendan Rodgers at the Foxes, the players around Vardy are swapping and changing around all the time, all having different spells and runs through the team, where you can't be certain who will be playing up top with the Vardy. Now that's another thing that makes talisman great with teams. They are the main players that are required to at least put in potentially their best performance as a team. So if they can play, they will definitely play. You don't really want too many options that will only start 2/3 of games, because even after a good game, you don't want to be in the position where you still don't even know if you will play the game after that. The worst kind of players to own in FPL. Now obviously a very honourable mention to the daddiest of Ings, Daddy Ings here, because he actually had one of the highest goal involvements out of anyone last season, directly helping a hand in 47% of his team's goals last season. But as we know with Ings, he's had some injuries in the past and he can sometimes be rested, where also he has been the least consistent out of any of the options I've chosen so far. But I personally think he can still do it, so I would put him in, but I didn't want to put in potentially some anomalies, because the whole point of talisman is their proven consistency for their teams. Moving on to the middle of the field, midfield. Now what if I told you Salah, Mane, De Bruyne or Sterling all aren't here? And we'll get to that, after we get to our first guy being Aubameyang! Aubameyang! Now, even though he had slightly less goal contribution than he did the season before, he was still directly involved in 44% of Arsenal's league goals last season, whilst kind of not even being their main striker. Now, this is a winner-winner chicken dinner from the winger here, but he played every single minute for Arsenal he could in the league last season, whilst also being the captain armband wearer since November. Guaranteed starter, guaranteed goal scorer, guaranteed FPL points. He's also the penalty kick taker, which, if you notice, all of the players I've chosen so far are also the penalty kick takers for their teams. But now Aubameyang is slightly different than the other talisman though, where even though he is usually involved, Arsenal still have some pretty good players and forwards that could still do it without him. Whereas for like Fulham, you probably won't see a Tom Kenny overscoring Mitrovic anytime soon. So maybe with the higher up teams, the ones with more quality, the talisman might not matter as much, where some of their other players could still be great FPL options as they can still play ball. And probably pretty good price as well. With the next man, who introduced his team how to play ball again, with Bruno! Now, Man United weren't terrible before he came, but since he's come in, he's definitely been their main man. Since he joined, he's been directly involved in a very impressive 50% of Man United's league goals, where he's had a fair share of free kicks and just a few penalties too. And I know he had less time and there's less data to look at, but he has been doing it for years now. Now, XG experts, the proper FPL nerds, will be screaming down your year all, saying he can't continue his amazing returns. It will stop. Don't get Bruno. With so many different ways of scoring and assisting he has, from all the set pieces to just being the main creative man in their team, surely he's likely to get, some goals and assists, I'd say. And maybe we see a different type of talisman in Bruno, where without him, Man United can still score, and quite a lot. And there are also a lot of great options at United in FPL, especially at a better price. But if you had to bet who would get the most points, or maybe the most direct involvement in all of their goals for United, then I think Bruno will definitely be fighting you for that top spot. And even if he's not very first, I'm very certain he'll be high up on that list. So maybe you can look at this one more as if you had to pick one that you could guarantee performances from all throughout the season, Bruno is your man. Because if you just had a Greenwood or a Rashford, you might start to get scared with every United goal just in case they weren't involved. But at the bigger teams, you don't quite see a noticeable talisman as much, where one day their main man could still be quiet, but their team does really well. As usually the better teams have a better squad, so don't have to rely on one player as much. We're talking about relying on one player, we have our next pick being Jacala Grealish. Now, even though he only had 15 direct goal involvements last season, it still means he was involved in 34% of Villa's league goals. He also made the second most chances out of anyone in the league, only bettered by De Bruyne, meaning he had even more than Trent, who makes about 72 attempted crosses a game. So imagine how much involvement Grealish would actually have if they had a striker with two working legs and know how to boot the ball. He was also the most fouled a player has ever been in a Premier League season, which apart from being called a professional diver, could actually get you some extra FPL points if someone was to directly score from the free kick or penalty he may have won. Now, a player like Jack Grealish is what you would call the creative talisman in a team. There's still some other good options in their team that can create stuff, but if a notification came up on your screen, Villa goal, your first thought is probably, is Jack Grealish involved? And that's what makes a talisman. If Villa went on a crazy good run, getting win after win after win, are you really going to be scared about not owning Samata? To not owning Mings in your team? No, you're not. It's going to be a Jack Grealish you're worried about. Moving on to the next player that might actually make you ha 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 ha, because it's Zaha, who was actually a Zaha last season, because he was that bad. But it's no surprise that when he had a poor season, Palace only scored 31 league goals. Kind of less than two other teams that got relegated. But even with how bad Zaha was last season, he was still directly involved in 30% of their goals, where you would imagine he could have a little bit better season this time around, where in previous seasons he was consistently reaching those 40% involvements. But when you look at a team like Palace, you can clearly see Zaha is their best player. He would probably get into a lot of teams in the league, and if you think that about the player, then I would think they are good enough to be considered the talisman, the almightier Palace, the person in the team that makes things happen. And that's what talismen are, the ones that teams are afraid to play, the problem in their attack, the ones that are most likely to do something, because if they do something, that translates to FPL points, which translates to our success. Now, I haven't put some other great options in here, and that's not to say you shouldn't pick them, such as the Salahs and Manes, but the problem with them is that they share points around the team. And the point I'm trying to make here is looking at the players that define their team's success. Where I'll give you this example of Sterling was Man City's top scorer in the league last season, but was actually only involved in 21% of their league goals, where like the likes of Ings was closer to 50% of Southampton's goals. Now obviously there is the thing that Man City not only have more players, but they score a lot more goals, so that percentage involvement is definitely spread around a lot more, because like 10% of Man City's goals is 10 goals, whereas like 10% of Crystal Palace's goals is like 3. But we already know the teams like Man City are going to score a lot, and everyone will have players from those kind of teams anyway, where here we are more looking at the kind of players that actually make their teams do bits just by themselves. Like without Sterling, City will still score. Without Ings, Southampton might not be as daddy. The standout talisman is what we are really focusing on here, which definitely going to be highlighted more in the smaller clubs. And that is the attacking side done. Now looking at defenders, I'm not quite talking about their attacking aspects, but more talking about how their defence suffers without them, which is definitely backed up from last season's stats, from how their team performed with and then without them. They definitely won't be called talisman, but are the super glue providers at the back of the team, so similar sort of concept, I guess. Starting with, I'm Eric Laporte. Now, it's no doubt that Laporte is one of the best defenders in the Man City team. Even if they go and spend another 300 odd million on more defenders, Laporte could still arguably be top of that list. Now, Laporte did get deck chaired last season and missed out over half of their games, chilling in a hospital bed instead. Lazy bastard, if you ask me. But even only playing less than a third of Man City's league games, 10 out of the 16 clean sheets Man City kept is when Laporte started. And it's no surprise that when he started almost all of their games the season before, they managed to bag in 18 clean sheets. Now this one is a little different because Man City have and probably still are going to get more defenders in. So now they probably have the cover so they aren't as reliant on him. But let's say for instance they didn't have cover. A player like Laporte could have been the best Man City player to choose from because if he doesn't play, their chances of a clean sheet drastically drops. Which is a concept that can definitely be backed up by our next defender in the Big Willie. Bolly. Now the Big Willie himself is now the most expensive Wolves defender in FPL, but actually potentially with good reason. He only played 22 league games last season because of injury, where when he did play, Wolves kept 12 clean sheets. Not bad. A clean sheet in over half of the games that he actually played. Now that is definitely not bad. But what about the 16 league games without him? They only managed to keep 1 clean sheet. Now obviously this doesn't mean he's the only good defender in the team. It just usually means they don't have a great backup. But there are certain defenders in Premier League teams that without them, their defence goes as soft as jellyfish and there are no clean sheets incoming anytime soon. Now, I still don't think he's worth it, say over a Cody or a Sice. But also, some people could look at it as if Bolly isn't playing, then is it worth having a Wolves defender because their defence just isn't as good and might not keep a clean sheet? Meaning having him could actually be like the safer option, but then also he's not the most optimal in terms of price here in FPL. So different options, but just an example. With our final defender, who could actually be an optimal price for what he could deliver, with Jamal Lascelles. Now Lascelles' boy only played 24 games because of injury last season, where when he played, Newcastle kept 8 clean sheets. And where he didn't play in the 14 other games, they only kept 3. He is also the club captain when he plays, and when he can play, he will definitely play. And that is also a good thing with these key defenders in their team, is that they are so pivotal to their team's defence. They will play every single minute they possibly can, getting those FPL points when they do so. And at 4.5 million, Lascelles could be a very good talisman defender option in FPL. Now looking at these talisman defenders, I call them, this definitely shouldn't be the main motivator behind your defender picks. But let's for instance look at the Vinagres and Justins at only 4.5 million. They look like great options because they are very attacking fullbacks at cheaper prices. But they would only play if their team's key defenders aren't playing, where realistically their team's probably going to perform worse because their best players aren't playing. So maybe them kind of players aren't as good as we actually think, where the more important defenders in their team could be the better but definitely safer options, as they are more important to their teams and more likely to get something. But again, not the main motivator, just another thing to think about. Then finishing the team with the goalkeeper. Now there are a lot of goalkeepers that are the main reason they don't concede like 100 goals a season. Like imagine West Ham's goal difference if they didn't have Fabianski looking after their wibbly wobbly back line. But the keeper I'm going for, just because of his performances last season, is the holy Nick Pope. Second most clean sheets out of any keeper, whilst also making the 3rd most saves, clearly showing that they wouldn't keep as many clean sheets without them. So that is the team. Now, this isn't actually the worst of teams, but again, I'm more focusing on the concept of talisman and important players for their club rather than these players themselves. So this isn't a suggestion for the squad. And also, these things can also vary. While some players and teams underperform while others overperform, and there are other talisman players that also could be great options, but these are just the ones I fancy chinwagging with today. So the main point I'm trying to make is that if you want to own a player for a team, maybe for a longer stretch of time, or maybe even just for a good fixture run, it is probably within your best interest. The safest option to go for is a player like this, the talisman that is more likely to be involved. Like with a player of Armstrong at Southampton, yeah, he's been playing really well and has been involved a lot at the restart, but even if Southampton do really well, it's still likely that he might not even be involved in any of the goals, whereas you probably would think that like Danny Ings would be more involved. Or like when Burnley might have a good run, the likes of Dwight McNeil could do really well, but you aren't really expecting him to get like 10 returns in 10 games. Now, yeah, we do have a budget to stick to, so there is that. And this is not to say that some of the other players and teams can't get good FPL returns, especially the bigger teams, but more with the lower teams, talisman or nothing for most people. A lot of FPL experts will try and get in the talisman for a team, also especially if they aren't too sure of new players in the team, where for example if Sancho goes to United, you don't know for sure if he could do well or if he'll affect Greenwood or Rashford at all. So the likes of Bruno is just the safer option, and especially at the start of the season where there's no really recent form we can really trust. So key point again, the talismen are the men in teams that make the team they are, meaning they are not only important enough for the team to not be a rotation risk, but are going to be the most likely player that's directly involved in their returns, translating to FPL returns potentially being the better players for us to choose. It's kind of simple. Choose the players that are more likely to be involved, right? So that is it. Talisman or no man. Thanks for watching, and remember...
Don't be a cheeky scrub. Subscribe to Nathan Bacon right now.